There is no one left who remembers the little girl. That is the first thing to understand about Marceline the Vampire Queen, and the show takes a very long time before it lets you feel the full weight of it. In Simon and Marcy, you watch a man who is slowly losing his mind walk a small child through a dead world, and you watch him sing to her, and you watch the thing on his head take pieces of him away one at a time, and the child does not understand yet that the price of being protected is being forgotten. She does not know, in that scene, that she is going to outlive everyone. She does not know that the man holding her hand will become a stranger who cannot recall her name. She is just cold and scared and following the one adult who has not abandoned her through a landscape of rubble and ash toward nothing in particular. She will spend the next 1,000 years understanding what that walk actually was. But this is not a video about Marceline's memories. That story has been told here and elsewhere. The story of the asymmetric witness who remembers everyone she has lost. This is a video about something underneath the memories, something the show keeps circling without ever naming directly. It is a video about what it does to a person to have no fixed self, to be a thing that keeps being rewritten, to live so long that the question stops being what do you remember, and becomes who is the person doing the remembering, when she has been so many different people across so many centuries, and none of them ever got to finish becoming whatever they were turning into before the next revision began. Welcome to Tonum. You are going to want to stay for this one. This one goes deeper than the songs and the sad flashbacks, into the actual shape of a life that does not end, and what a person has to become in order to survive that shape without dissolving into something that is no longer a person at all. Get comfortable. Let us get into it. There is a way of talking about Marceline that the internet settled on a long time ago. She is the cool one. She is the rebel. She plays bass. She dresses in red and black. She floats instead of walking. She's sarcastic and guarded. And she has a sad backstory that explains all of it. That reading is not wrong. It is just shallow. It treats the sadness as decoration, a flavor added to a character design to make her interesting, when the sadness is actually the load-bearing structure of the entire character. Marceline is not a sad person who happens to also be cool. Marceline is a person who has lived more than 1,000 years, and every single thing about her, down to the way she holds her body and the music she chooses to make, is a strategy for surviving that length of time without disappearing entirely. Think about what 1,000 years actually is, not as a number on a page, as a lived experience stretching out behind a single continuous awareness. You are, at most, roughly 1% of the age Marceline is. Every person you have ever loved, every person you will ever love, the entire span of human memory you have personal access to, fits inside a window that to her is shorter than a single season of weather. She has watched not just people die, but the very concept of the people she knew become unrecognizable. The languages change around her. The geography changes. The kinds of beings that walk the earth change. The version of herself that existed for one stretch of those years would not recognize the version that exists now, would not share her tastes, or her fears, or her understanding of what matters. And the show's central, quiet, devastating question about her is this. When you live that long, is there a you at all? Or is there just a series of survivors, each one inheriting the wreckage and the journals of the last, each one a stranger to the one before? That question is not asked out loud anywhere in the series. The show is far too careful for that. But it is asked, over and over, in the structure of the episodes that center her, in the choices she makes, in the things she keeps, and the things she lets go. To trace the philosophy of Marceline is to assemble an answer the show never states. Out of evidence, the show scatters across 8 years and 10 seasons. And the answer, when it finally comes together, is one of the largest ideas the series ever contains. So we are going to move through the evidence slowly, the way the show itself moves, letting each piece sit before adding the next, building the argument the way the show builds it, until the conclusion feels less like a claim, and more like something you knew all along and never had the words for. A word, before we begin, about why this character can hold this much weight when so many others cannot. Adventure Time is full of beings who have lived a long time. The Ice King has, in a sense. Princess Bubblegum has. There are ancient entities and immortal forces scattered all through Ooh. But most of them respond to their long duration by becoming simpler, more fixed, more like forces than people. The Ice King's long life is a long erasure. Other ancient beings calcify into single traits, into roles, into functions. Marceline is the only one the show uses to ask what it would mean to live 1,000 years and remain complicated, remain a full person, remain capable of change and growth and contradiction the whole way through. She is the show's one sustained experiment in immortality with interiority. The one case where the writers refuse to let duration flatten the character into a type. And because she stays complicated, she becomes the one place the show can actually examine what duration does to herself, rather than just asserting that it does something. The others tell you immortality is hard. Marceline shows you, from the inside, exactly how and exactly what it takes to survive it as a person, rather than a monument. So when this video calls itself the philosophy of Marceline, it does not mean a list of things Marceline believes. She is not a character who delivers philosophy in dialogue. It means the philosophy embedded in how she is built, in the shape of her existence, in the pattern that emerges when you lay all her episodes side by side and look at what they are collectively saying about time and identity and the work of remaining a person. The philosophy is not in her words, it is in her structure. And recovering it requires doing what the show trusts its best viewers to do, which is to watch the small moments closely, to notice what is being shown rather than only what is being said, and to assemble, patiently, the argument the show was making all along underneath the songs and the adventures. Begin near the beginning, with the version of Marceline the show introduced before it knew what she would become. Henchman is Season 1, Episode 22. It aired in 2010, in the show's first year, long before the writers had decided who this character was or what she would carry. In it, Marceline is a straightforward antagonist of sorts, a vampire who takes Finn on as a kind of servant, who appears to be cruel, who seems to be testing him with increasingly dangerous tasks, who behaves like a creature with no concern for the small mortal she has roped into her orbit. For most of the episode, she's exactly what she looks like. A scary vampire being scary. And then the episode turns, the way the best early Adventure Time episodes turn, and reveals that the cruelty was a performance the whole time. The dangerous tasks were not malice. They were a test of a different kind, and underneath the test was something the episode does not quite let you name yet, something that looks, in retrospect, a great deal like loneliness. Marceline does not actually want a henchman. She wants company, and she does not know how to ask for it. Because asking for it would require admitting she needs it, and admitting she needs it would require lowering a defense she has spent centuries building. So she dresses the need up as domination. She makes the relationship transactional and frightening, because a transactional, frightening relationship cannot hurt her the way a real one could. Watch what the show is already doing in episode 22 of season 1, before it has any idea of the depth it will later give her. It is establishing the central behavioral pattern of the character. Marceline performs invulnerability in order to get close to people without the risk of getting close to people. The cruelty is a costume. The detachment is a wall with a person hiding behind it, hoping someone will be patient enough to find the door. And the reason this matters, the reason it is the right place to start, is that this pattern does not come from nowhere. It is the learned behavior of a being who has gotten close to people before and watched them die. Or worse, watched them forget her. The wall is not her personality. The wall is a scar. And once you see it as a scar, you cannot unsee it in any episode she appears in for the rest of the series. There is something worth pausing on in the fact that this is her introduction. The first time the audience meets Marceline, she is a threat. She is positioned as something to be wary of, a powerful creature toying with the protagonist, a figure of menace. And this is, in retrospect, the show being more honest than it probably knew how to be at the time. Because that is exactly how Marceline presents herself to the world by design. She leads with the menace. She wants to be met first as a threat, because being met as a threat is safe, and being met as a person is not. The audience's first impression of her is the impression that keeps people at the distance she has learned to require. The show would spend the next 9 seasons slowly dismantling that first impression, peeling back the menace to reveal the frightened, loving, lonely person underneath. And the dismantling is so gradual that it feels like discovery rather than revision. But the menace was never the truth. The menace was the costume she put on for her own debut. And the audience, like everyone in her life, had to earn the right to see past it. And consider what it means that a being could need a costume for 1,000 years. Most people perform to some degree, especially when young, especially when guarding a fresh wound. But most people, given enough time and enough safe relationships can eventually lower the performance, can let themselves be seen. The performance is a phase, usually a thing you grow out of as trust accumulates. Marceline cannot grow out of it on the normal schedule, because the normal schedule does not apply to her. Every time she begins to lower the wall, to let someone pass the menace, that someone ages and dies, or forgets her, and she learns the lesson again, and the wall goes back up. 1,000 years of that produces a performance so practiced, so reflexive, so fused to her that it can look exactly like a personality. Henchman is the show catching her mid-performance, in her very first scene, doing the thing she has done for 10 centuries, leading with the menace so that no one gets close enough to leave a wound that has not already been earned 1,000 times over. And the show would, much later, reward the viewers who read the scar instead of the trait by revealing the exact injuries that produced it, the ruins, and the forgetting and the 1,000-year accumulation of loss. But it does not give you that reward up front. In Henchman, all you have is the menace and a faint, unexplained sense that the menace is covering something. The show asks you to trust, on almost no evidence, that there is a person behind the threat, and then spends 9 seasons proving the trust was warranted. That is a remarkable thing to ask of an audience, and a remarkable patience to maintain as a creator. Most shows would have explained her sooner, would have rushed to make her sympathetic. Adventure Time lets her stay frightening and unexplained for a long time, because that is how she actually presents to the world, and the show would rather be true to how she guards herself than rush to comfort the viewer with her backstory. Before we go further, it is worth being clear about the difference between a personality trait and a scar, because the entire reading of this character depends on it. A personality trait is just how someone is. A scar is the shape left behind by an injury. When you read Marceline's guardedness as a trait, she becomes a type, the aloof cool girl, and the show becomes a show with a stock character in it. When you read her guardedness as a scar, the question changes completely. It stops being how is she, and becomes what happened to her, and then what happened to her becomes the actual subject. And the actual subject turns out to be 1,000 years of a very specific kind of injury, the injury of outliving and being outlived and being forgotten, repeated so many times that the body learned to flinch before the blow even came. The show is asking you from season 1 to read the scar and not the trait. Most viewers read the trait. The show is patient. It will spend 10 seasons showing you the wound. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The cleanest place to see the show ask its central question directly is the Stakes miniseries. Stakes begins in season 7, sitting in the catalogue as episodes 6 through 13. 8 episodes aired across 4 nights in November of 2015. The premise sounds, on the surface, like a Monster of the Week arc stretched to miniseries length. Marceline gets cured of her vampirism. The souls of the vampires she had absorbed over the centuries get released back into the world, and she has to hunt them down and reabsorb them. That is the plot. That is not what it is about. What it is about is a woman who, given the chance to become something other than what she has been for 1,000 years, takes it instantly, without hesitation, and then has to find out whether she is still herself on the other side of the change. Watch very carefully how she makes the decision. Princess Bubblegum has built a machine that can extract the vampire essence from her body. There is no long deliberation. There is no scene where Marceline weighs the costs, lists the benefits, worries about the consequences. She wants it gone. She has wanted it gone. You slowly realize for far longer than she has ever been able to admit, because the wanting is being buried under 1,000 years of pretending the vampire thing was fine, was cool, was who she is, was a part of her she had made peace with. The speed of her, yes, is the tell. That is not the behavior of someone who is comfortable in her own skin. That is the behavior of someone who has been waiting, possibly for centuries, for someone to finally offer her a different skin to live in. And the miniseries is honest about how strange the wanting is, because being a vampire is in most stories the power fantasy. Strength, flight, immortality, the freedom from death that mortals dream about. Marceline has all of it, and she would give all of it away in a heartbeat to be a person who can grow old. That inversion is the first thing Stakes wants you to sit with. The thing that looks like a gift from the outside is felt, from the inside, as a sentence. The immortality everyone else would envy is the precise thing she most wants to be free of. Because she has lived it. She knows what it actually costs, and what it costs, she has learned, is the self, slowly, continuously, forever. And then comes the part the show is actually interested in. Once she is human, once the vampirism is gone, and her body is mortal again, Marceline starts to dream. The dreams are memories, surfacing now that the thing that suppressed them has been removed. And in those dreams, you meet a version of Marceline you have never seen and will never see again at this length. A child, a frightened, ordinary, mortal child, walking through the ruins of the world, holding the hand of a man who is becoming a stranger to her in real time. Her mother appears in one of these memories. Her mother sings her a song. The song is Everything Stays. It is the most important 3 minutes in the entire understanding of who this character is, and it is worth slowing all the way down for, because the show will spend the rest of its run quietly responding to it. The mother sings, in essence, that things stay the way they are, even as they change. That the same old tree will look a little different every single time you come to see it, but that it is still, underneath, the same tree. It is a lullaby. It is a comfort. It is meant to reassure a small child that change does not mean loss, that you can grow and shift and become different, and still, at the core, be continuous with who you were. The same self in a new arrangement. A mother sings this to a child because it is the gentlest possible lie, the lie that lets a child sleep, the promise that the people and the places they love will not really go away, will only change a little, like the tree. And here is the terrible irony the show is building underneath. The irony it does not state out loud because it never needs to. That lullaby is a lie, or rather, it is a hope that Marceline's entire existence will spend 1,000 years methodically disproving. Because Marceline does not stay the same as she changes. Marceline changes so completely, so many times, over such an unimaginable span of years, that staying the same becomes the one thing she cannot do. The mother promises continuity. Immortality delivers the opposite. The tree, given 1,000 years, does not look a little different. The tree becomes a different tree entirely, and then becomes a forest, and then becomes ash, and then becomes a different tree again. And somewhere in there, the original tree is gone, and no one can say exactly when it left. This is the philosophical core of the character, and it is worth stating as plainly as the show refuses to. A normal human life is short enough that you get to be, roughly, one person. You change, you grow, you have phases and crises and reinventions, but there is a continuous thread of self running through the whole thing, because the whole thing is over before that thread can fully fray. 60 years, 80 years, even 100 is short enough that the person at the end can still see a line connecting back to the person at the start. Marceline does not get that mercy. Marceline's thread frays and reweaves and frays again, over and over. For 10 centuries, she is not one person who happened to live a very long time. She is a long succession of people, each one wearing the same face, each one inheriting the previous one's memories like a stack of journals, written by someone they can barely recognize anymore. The question Stakes asks, underneath all the vampire hunting and the action and the spectacle, is whether there is any continuous self at all in there, or whether immortality is simply a very slow erasure that never quite reaches the end, a death by 1,000 small revisions, each one too gradual to notice. And the miniseries gives the abstract idea a concrete and brilliant form in the vampires themselves. When Marceline is cured, the souls of the vampires she absorbed over the centuries are released back into the world, and she has to hunt them down one by one. Each of these vampires is a being she defeated long ago in the early dark centuries of her existence by taking their essence into herself. And here is the quiet genius of the conceit. Each absorbed vampire is, in a sense, a piece of who she became. The powers she has, the abilities that define the Vampire Queen, are not natively hers. They are accumulated. She gained the power of invisibility from one defeated vampire, the power of transformation from another, the deep regenerative healing from another. Marceline is, quite literally, an assembly of the beings she has consumed in order to survive. Her very identity as the Vampire Queen is a patchwork of absorbed others, a self-stitched together, out of the things she had to become in order to keep living. Sit with what that means as a metaphor for survival across deep time. To live 1,000 years, Marceline did not stay one fixed thing. She took on power after power, ability after ability. Each one absorbed from an enemy in a moment of mortal danger. Each one a new piece of armor against a world that kept trying to end her. The vampire queen people see, the powerful and self-possessed figure floating above U, is the accumulated result of 1,000 years of becoming whatever she needed to become to survive the next threat. And Stakes forces her to confront every one of those absorbed pieces directly, as a separate being released back into the world, demanding to be faced. It is as though the show took the idea of the succession of selves and gave each phase of survival its own body, its own personality, its own scene. She does not just have a vague past. She has a past made of specific beings she had to overcome and incorporate. And now they are all loose, and she has to reckon with each one. There is a particular horror the miniseries reaches in its later parts, when the most dangerous of the released vampires, the one whose essence carried the deepest darkness, threatens to consume Marceline rather than the other way around, threatens to turn the long history of her survival inside out. For 1,000 years, Marceline was the one who absorbed others to live. Now she faces being absorbed herself, dissolved into another being's accumulation, becoming a piece of someone else's patchwork self. And this is the deepest fear the miniseries can stage, deeper even than mortality. It is the fear of losing the self, not to forgetting, the Simon death, but to incorporation, to becoming a component of something larger that erases your boundaries entirely. The self can dissolve forward into a stranger through forgetting. It can also dissolve sideways into another self through being consumed. Stakes lets her face both and survive both and choose, at the end, to gather her absorbed pieces back into herself and remain the assembled, patchwork, hard-won, continuous vampire queen she has spent 1,000 years constructing. And notice that the show chose to ask this question through a miniseries, not a single episode. That is a structural decision with meaning in it. A single episode could have given you the premise and a tidy resolution. 8 episodes across 4 nights forces you to live in the question, to spend real time with the human Marceline before the show takes the humanity away again, to feel the length of the consideration, to meet each absorbed soul as its own scene. The form mirrors the content. Immortality is about duration, about the weight of accumulated time and accumulated selves. And so the show makes you sit in the duration, makes the meditation on a long life take a long time, makes the reckoning with a patchwork self require 8 separate confrontations. You do not get to skip to the answer. Neither does she. That is the point. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. By the end of Stakes, Marceline chooses to become a vampire again. This is the moment most people read as a simple triumph, a return to form, the hero reclaiming her power in order to defeat the threat. And on the level of plot and action, that is exactly what happens. The released vampire souls are a danger. She needs her power to contain them. She takes the power back and saves the day. But watch what the choice actually means underneath the action. She got out. She got the thing she had wanted on some deep buried level for 1,000 years. She got to be human, to be mortal, to be a person with a guaranteed ending and a body that ages and a life that is, finally, the right length to be one person all the way through. And she gives it back. She chooses to return to the long, fraying, self-erasing existence. And she does it deliberately, with full and complete knowledge of exactly what she is choosing, because she has just spent the miniseries living the alternative. That is not a return to form. That is a person deciding that the work of continuing, the work of holding herself together across centuries, is something she is willing to keep doing, rather than escape. It is the opposite of giving up. It is choosing the harder version of being alive, the version with no ending. The version where the self has to be maintained by hand forever, and choosing it not because she has to, but because in the moment of crisis, protecting the people she loves matters more to her than her own release. She trades her one chance at a finite life for the ability to keep the people around her safe. That is a staggering thing to do, and the show does almost nothing to mark it as staggering, because the show does not comment on this. It does not add a speech where Marceline explains the weight of what she just did. It does not slow down to tell you that she has just re-accepted a sentence most beings would consider the worst possible curse. It does not have another character turn to her and say, "Do you understand what you just gave up?" It just lets her make the choice and move forward, the way she has made 1,000 difficult choices and moved forward, because that by now is the only mode of living available to her. The continuing is not dramatic to her anymore. It is just Tuesday. It is just what she does. And that ordinariness, the way the show treats the reacceptance of immortality as a thing that does not even require a monologue, is far more chilling than any monologue would have been. The most enormous decision of her existence is to her routine. She has made versions of it before. She will make versions of it again. The size of it is invisible to her, precisely because she is the one who has to carry it. Let that sit for a second. The cost of living forever is not, primarily, the death of the people around you, though that is real, and that is part of it. The deeper cost is that you have to keep deciding to be yourself, over and over, with no end in sight, while every force in the universe is slowly pulling that self apart. A mortal gets to coast. The brevity of a mortal life does the work of holding the person together. You do not have to actively maintain your continuity from age 20 to age 80, because the line is short enough to hold on its own. Marceline has to do that work by hand, every day, for centuries, against the constant erosion of time, and she has decided, at the end of stakes, to keep doing it. That decision is the most important thing she ever does, and the show buries it inside a monster fight. Because that is how the show works. It hides the philosophy inside the adventure, and it trusts you to dig. If you want the show to say the quiet part almost out loud, the place to look is The Vault. The Vault is Season 5, Episode 34. It aired in 2014, and it is the episode that takes the abstract idea we have been circling, the idea that an immortal is not one person but a succession of people, and makes it shockingly literal. In The Vault, a buried memory surfaces, a memory Marceline did not know she was carrying, and it belongs to one of her own past lives. The episode reveals, plainly and without much ceremony, that Marceline has lived previous existences, that there have been earlier versions of her, earlier selves with their own faces and their own loves and their own unfinished business, and that those selves are not simply metaphors for change. They are, in the logic of the episode, separate enough to surface as a haunting from inside her own mind. Consider how strange and how revealing that is. The show could have left the idea of Marceline's many selves entirely figurative, a way of talking about how much a person changes over 1,000 years. Instead, it externalizes it. It gives one of her past selves enough independent reality to become a restless spirit, a thing distinct from the Marceline of the present, with its own grievance, its own ache, its own need to be acknowledged. The episode is, in effect, dramatizing the central question in the bluntest possible terms. Is the Marceline of the present the same being as the Marceline of a previous life? The episode's answer is unsettling and exactly right. They are connected, but they are not simply identical. There is a continuity between them, but it is the continuity of a river, not the continuity of a stone. The water that was here is not the water that is here now, and yet it is the same river, because the riverbed holds, because something keeps the flowing organized into a single shape. And watch what the resolution requires. To put the ghost of the past self to rest, the present Marceline has to acknowledge it. She has to face the earlier version, attend to its unfinished pain, take responsibility for a self she barely remembers being. This is the practice we have been describing, made visible as a plot. The work of being a continuous self across 1,000 years is precisely this work of acknowledging your own past selves, of attending to the versions of you that you have outgrown or buried or half forgotten, of refusing to simply abandon them as strangers. The ghost in the vault is what happens when an immortal fails to do that work, when a past self is left unattended and unmourned. And the resolution is what doing the work looks like. Marceline reaches back across the gap, claims the earlier self as her own despite the distance, and in doing so reaves the thread that time had frayed. The river reclaims its source. This is why the vault matters so much to the philosophy, and why it deserves to sit at the center of any honest account of who Marceline is. Every other episode shows the practice of self-maintenance pointed forward and outward, toward the future and toward other people. The refusal to forget, the choosing to love the doomed, the containment of the monster. The vault shows the practice pointed backward and inward, toward the self's own buried history, and it reveals that maintaining a continuous self is not only about what you carry forward, it is also about what you go back for. The immortal who wants to remain a person cannot only keep choosing who to be next, she also has to keep reclaiming who she has already been, has to keep gathering up the abandoned past selves before they become ghosts, has to keep saying, That frightened earlier version, with its own face and its own grief, that was also me. I will not leave it behind. The thread runs in both directions. The work is constant in both directions. And a being who lives 1,000 years has 1,000 years of past selves, to keep recleaning an ever-growing archive of former lives that each, left unattended, could rise as a haunting. Think about the loneliness of that specifically. Most people are haunted, if they are haunted at all, by other people, by the dead they have lost. Marceline is, in the vault, haunted by herself, by a version of her own life she had to leave behind in order to keep living. That is a form of grief that only the very long-lived can experience. The grief of outliving not only everyone you knew, but every previous version of who you were. She does not only attend the graves of the people she loved, she attends the graves of her own former selves, and she does it alone, because there is no one else left who remembers those selves either. The asymmetric witness is witness even to her own past existences. No one can corroborate the ghost. No one can tell her whether the earlier self really was as the ghost remembers, or whether even the haunting is a revision. She is, once again, the sole author and the sole mourner of her own enormous history. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a detail in the math worth naming directly, because it is the engine under everything. For a mortal, love and time run on roughly the same clock. You love people who will be there for most of the span you have, and you lose them near the end, when you are also near your own end. So the grief and the life run out together. The arithmetic is bearable, because it is symmetrical. For Marceline, the clocks are catastrophically mismatched. She loves on a 1,000-year clock. The people she loves live on an 80-year clock, if that, which means that for her, love is not a thing that accompanies a life of roughly equal length. It is a brief flare inside a darkness that goes on and on after the flare is gone. She lights a match, and the match burns for the length of a mortal life, and then it goes out. And she is still standing there in the dark, holding the spent match, for centuries, before she lets herself light another one. That is the asymmetry that should, by any rational calculation, have taught her to stop lighting matches, and she never stopped. That refusal to stop against the brutal asymmetry of the clocks is the whole of the second pillar, and it is why every relationship she has carries a weight that the relationships of immortal characters simply cannot. If Stakes is the show asking whether a continuous self can survive immortality, I Remember You is the show showing you in unbearable detail what the failure mode looks like. I Remember You is Season 4, Episode 25. It aired on October 15th, 2012. It is, on the surface, a sad episode about the Ice King visiting Marceline and asking for her help writing songs, and not understanding why she is upset by his presence. The song that comes out of it, Remember You, was written by Olivia Olson, along with Hynden Walsh and Pendleton Ward, and it became one of the most beloved pieces of music the show ever produced. Underneath the song, the episode is the single most direct portrait the series ever paints of the thing Marceline is most terrified of becoming. Here is what is actually happening in that episode, told as plainly as possible. A man who once saved Marceline's life, who protected her as a child, who was the closest thing to a father she had in the dead world, after the war, has lost every memory of having done so. The crown that gave him power took his mind in exchange, piece by piece, the same way you watched it begin to take him in, Simon and Marcy. And now he stands in front of the person he raised, and he does not know who she is. He feels a fondness toward her that he cannot explain or account for. He has fragments. He has a scrap of paper, a note he wrote to himself, in some moment of lucidity, long ago, begging her to forgive him, telling her that by the time she reads this, he will not remember writing it, will not remember her, will not be himself anymore. He reads it aloud in the episode without fully understanding that it is about her, that it is about the two of them, that the apology is the last intact piece of the person he used to be, sealed in an envelope and addressed across the gulf of his own forgetting. And Marceline has to sit across from this. She has to look at the face of the man who saved her, and watch it be inhabited by someone who has no idea what he did, no idea what he meant to her, no idea that the sad little vampire he has come to bother for help with a song is the child he carried through the ruins. This is the thing the show is showing you about her terror, and it is doing it through Simon, but make no mistake, it is about her. Simon is the live demonstration of what happens when a mind cannot hold itself together across time. The crown is just an accelerated version of what time itself does slowly, to everyone, eventually. And Marceline, who is going to live 1,000 years, who is going to outlast every single being she meets, is looking directly at the end state of memory's failure, and she is recognizing it. That could be me. Given enough time, that is what happens to a self. It comes apart. And the worst part, the part the episode is brave enough to show, is that it does not even hurt the person it is happening to. Simon is not suffering in that scene. Simon is, in his own diminished way, content. He has forgotten enough to be at peace. He has lost so much that the loss no longer registers as loss. Marceline is the only one in the room who remembers what was lost. And so Marceline is the only one in the room who is in pain. This is the gap the show keeps returning to with her, and it is the gap that defines her entire philosophical position. To remember is to suffer, but to forget is to die while your body keeps walking around, smiling, asking strangers for help with songs. Simon chose, in a sense, by putting on the crown again and again across the centuries, the painless death, the slow, comfortable dissolution into someone who feels things he cannot explain, and has no grief because he has no memory of anything to grieve. Marceline refuses that path. She holds on to the memories even though every one of them is an agony, even though forgetting would be a mercy, because she has decided, somewhere deep and unspoken, that the alternative is worse, that becoming someone who does not know what she has lost is not relief. It is the actual death, the one that matters, the one where the person ends and only the body remains. That is a philosophical stance. That is a fully formed position on what a self is for and what it is made of. Marceline believes, without ever once articulating it, that a person is the sum of what they refuse to forget, and that letting the memories go would not be peace. It would be the end of her. And consider how this reframes the entire emotional texture of the character. The sadness people read as her aesthetic, the melancholy that hangs around her, is not an affect. It is the cost of a choice she makes continuously. She could put down the weight. Simon shows her that the weight can be put down, that there was a version of existence where the grief simply stops because the memory that generated it is gone. She watches him live in that version. Lighter, simpler, emptier. And she decides every day to keep carrying the weight instead. The melancholy is the visible sign of an invisible heroism. She chooses to keep hurting because the hurt is proof that the people were real, and the proof is more precious to her than the relief would be. Once you understand that, you cannot watch her be sad in the same way again. The sadness is not something happening to her. It is something she is choosing, the way you would choose to keep a heavy photograph album, even though it makes you cry, because putting it down would mean forgetting the faces. The show extends this study of memory and self through Simon across several episodes. And Betty, Season 5, Episode 48, is one of the most important of them. In Betty, the woman Simon loved before the crown took him, his fiancée from the world before the war, comes forward across time, determined to save him, to undo what the crown has done, to get her Simon back. The episode is about her devotion, and about the impossibility at the heart of it, because the Simon she loves no longer exists in any retrievable form. The crown did not put him to sleep. The crown overwrote him, slowly, completely, replacing the man she knew with the Ice King, a memory at a time. To get Simon back, Betty would have to reverse the overriding, would have to reassemble a self that has been scattered and erased across 1,000 years. And the episode is honest enough to let that be genuinely hard, genuinely uncertain, genuinely tragic. What makes Betty matter to the philosophy of Marceline is that it shows the failure mode from the outside, from the perspective of the one who loved the lost self and wants it back. Marceline, in I Remember You, experiences Simon's dissolution as the child he raised. Watching the protector forget her, Betty experiences it as the lover, watching the partner be erased. Together, the two episodes triangulate the same horror from two directions, and they make the same point. A self that is overwritten is not asleep, waiting to be woken. It is gone, in any sense that matters, and the people who loved it are left with a body that no longer contains them. This is the precise outcome. Marceline spends 1,000 years refusing for herself. She watches what happened to Simon. She watches Betty break herself against the impossibility of reversing it. And she takes from both the same lesson, reinforced. Do not let the overriding happen. Hold the self together by hand, whatever it costs. And the show goes further still. In Broke His Crown, Season 8, Episode 1, which finds Simon in a rare and fragile moment of restored lucidity, briefly himself again, briefly able to remember, and to speak as the man he was. The episode is largely about the people who love him gathering around this temporary return, knowing it is temporary, knowing the crown will reclaim him. And Marceline is part of that gathering. She gets, for a moment, the thing I remember you denied her, the thing that seemed impossible. She gets Simon back, briefly. The real Simon, the one who knows her, who remembers the ruins and the seeing and the protecting. And then she has to let him go again, back into the fog, because the lucidity cannot hold. The crown wins. It always, eventually, wins. Think about what it does to a person to be given back, for an hour, the self of someone they lost, and then to have to watch that self dissolve a second time. Marceline has lived 1,000 years of single losses, of people who died once and stayed gone. With Simon, she gets something stranger and crueler, a loss that recurs, a person who keeps being almost returned and then taken again, a grief with no clean edge because the object of the grief keeps flickering back into partial existence. And through all of it, across I Remember You and Betty and Broke His Crown, Marceline does the same thing she always does. She shows up, she attends, she loves the flickering, dissolving, half-present self of the man who saved her, not because loving him is rewarding or stable or safe, but because attending to him is the practice, and the practice is the self, and she will not stop performing it, just because it hurts, and will never resolve. The relationship with Simon is the longest unfinished grief in the series, and Marceline carries it, open and unhealed, for 1,000 years, by choice, because closing it would mean letting him go entirely, and she has decided that she would rather hold an open wound than close it by forgetting. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now turn to a much earlier and much smaller episode, because the show plants this idea long before it pays it off. What was missing is Season 3, Episode 10. It aired in 2011. On the surface, it is a quest episode with a fun premise. A creature called the Door Lord steals something precious from each of the main characters, and they have to form a band and play a song sincere enough to open a magic door and get their things back. It is light. It is funny. It also happens to be the episode where the show first lets you see clearly that Marceline's defenses are a performance, and that underneath the performance is a person desperate to be known and terrified of it in exactly equal measure. The thing the Door Lord steals from Marceline is not an object the way the others lose objects. Finn loses a lock of hair. Jake loses a beloved item. Their losses are concrete and external. What Marceline lost is harder to name, harder to point to, and the song she sings to try to open the door, the one everyone remembers, is aimed squarely at Princess Bubblegum, and it is not really a love song so much as an accusation wearing the costume of a love song. She sings, in essence, that she is just somebody's problem, that she should not even bother trying, that the other person clearly does not want to be near her. It is the sound of someone who has decided, preemptively before any rejection has actually occurred, that she will be rejected, and who is performing the rejection herself, out loud, so that no one else gets the chance to do it to her first. Watch the scene where she sings it, because the staging carries the whole meaning. She is not singing to a crowd or to the air. She is singing directly at Bubblegum, in front of the others, in a moment that is supposed to be about working together to open the door, and the song keeps sliding from the group task into something far more personal and far more exposed. She accuses. She pushes. She makes herself sharp and difficult precisely at the moment when sincerity is required, because sincerity is the thing she cannot safely offer. The door, remember, only opens for a genuinely heartfelt song. And Marceline's heartfelt song turns out to be an attack, because for her the most heartfelt and the most offended thing are the same thing, tangled together so tightly that the love can only come out as an accusation, and the accusation is the only available shape the love can take. The others watch, uncomfortable, aware they are seeing something that was not meant to be this raw. The show holds on the discomfort. It does not resolve the tension into a clean reconciliation. It just lets the wound be visible for a moment, and then moves on, the way it always does. Think about why a person does that. Think about the specific kind of wound that produces that exact behavior. A person performs their own rejection when they have been left before, when they expect, on the basis of long and bitter experience, to be left again. when they have learned over a very long time that the people you allow close to you are precisely the people who eventually become memories you have to carry alone after they are gone. The accusation in this song is armor. If she names the distance first, she controls it. If she decides she is unwanted before anyone tells her so, then the telling cannot hurt her because she got there first. It is a strategy. It is a 1,000-year-old strategy for surviving attachment when attachment is guaranteed to end in loss. And it is a strategy that does not work, which is the whole point of the episode. Because here is the thing the song reveals despite itself. It comes out anyway. The need to be heard, to be seen, to be close to bubblegum, leaks straight through the performance of not needing anyone. The armor is full of holes, and the person inside it is fully visible. The accusation is so clearly a confession in disguise that the disguise functions as a kind of honesty, a way of saying the true thing while pretending to say a defensive thing. Marceline's entire emotional architecture is built around the myth of loving mortal beings. When you yourself will not die, the cold arithmetic that says every act of love is a deposit on future grief, and the rational response is to make no deposits at all. And what was missing is the show demonstrating very early and very gently that the math does not actually govern her. That she cannot stop loving people no matter how much it would protect her to stop. The song escapes. The need escapes. The leak is the most human thing about her, and it is the precise thing that immortality, with all its logic of self-protection, should have killed in her long ago, and never quite could. Sit with that for a moment, because it is the second pillar of the whole philosophy, and it deserves real weight. The most logical thing for an immortal being to do is to stop forming attachments entirely, because attachments to mortal beings are guaranteed with absolute certainty to end in loss, and an immortal has an infinite number of these losses stretching out ahead. A perfectly rational immortal would be utterly, deliberately alone, having calculated coldly that the pain of each ending is not worth the temporary comfort of each beginning. A perfectly rational immortal would do what Marceline keeps almost doing, what the wall and the cruelty and the self-rejecting song are all reaching toward, which is total isolation as a defense against infinite grief. And Marceline is not that. Marceline keeps loving people. She loves Simon. She loves Bubblegum. She loves Finn and Jake in her prickly, sideways, never quite admitted way. She loves a whole world of beings who will all be gone in what is, to her, the blink of an eye. And she does it knowing precisely what it will cost, having paid the cost already more times than she can count. That is the second pillar. Not just that a self is what you refuse to forget, but that connection is worth the grief every single time, even when the grief is the only guaranteed outcome of the connection. And there is a quiet courage in that second pillar that is easy to miss because the show never frames it as courage. To keep loving when loss is guaranteed is not naivety in her case. She is not loving the doomed because she does not understand that they are doomed. She understands it better than anyone alive. She has buried more people than there are people in most lives. She knows, with total clarity, that every new attachment is a future grief she is signing herself up for, that the warm thing she is reaching toward will become a cold absence she carries alone. And she reaches anyway. That is not the innocence of someone who has not yet been hurt. That is the deliberate, eyes-open choice of someone who has been hurt past counting and has decided that the hurting is worth it. That a love that ends is still better than the self-protection that never begins. That the grief is the price of having been close to something real, and the price is, every time, worth paying. A perfectly rational immortal would stop paying. Marceline keeps paying knowingly, which is a far braver thing than not knowing the cost. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting in full knowledge of the cost, and she acts in fuller knowledge of this particular cost than any being in the series. Skywish, Season 5, Episode 29, makes this concrete in a way that is almost unbearable once you see it for what it actually is. The plot is straightforward. Princess Bubblegum needs to retrieve a stolen object, and to do it, she requires something with a strong sentimental resonance to use as a kind of magical tracking device. A thing so saturated with meaning that it can point the way to its match. The object she settles on turns out to be Hambo. Hambo is a small, worn, ordinary-looking stuffed toy. It belonged to Marceline. It was given to her by Simon when she was a child in the dead world after the war, in the time of Simon and Marcy. It is, functionally, the only physical object that survives from her childhood. It is the one tangible link between the 1,000-year-old vampire queen and the frightened little girl in the ruins. the single surviving artifact of the person who saved her and then forgot her. And the episode reveals a history. Marceline had given Hambo away. She had given it at some point in their long shared past to Princess Bubblegum as the single most meaningful thing she owned, the most precious object she could offer, an act of trust enormous beyond what the simple toy could possibly convey to anyone who did not know its weight. And then, the episode reveals, in the bitterness and the hurt of their falling out, Bubblegum had traded it away, let it go, lost the most precious object Marceline had ever entrusted to another living being. The climax of the episode is Bubblegum tracking it down, retrieving it from the Sky Witch, and returning it to Marceline. The expression on Marceline's face when she holds that toy again is one of the most quietly devastating things the show ever animates. She clutches it to herself. She's completely undone by it, all her armor gone in an instant. And the show does not play swelling music to tell you how to feel. It just holds steadily, on her face holding the toy, and trusts the image to do the work. Slow all the way down on that final moment. Because the show does. And it does so deliberately. Marceline takes the toy back into her hands. She does not say much. There is not a speech. There is barely dialogue. There is a vampire, who is in every other scene of the series, guarded and sharp and floating above everything, suddenly small, suddenly still, suddenly holding a battered stuffed animal as though it were the only solid object in the world. And the show, which could so easily have scored this with swelling strings to instruct the audience exactly how moved to be, chooses restraint instead. It lets the image carry the weight unassisted. It trusts that you understand, without being told, that you are watching a 1,000-year-old being reunited with the one piece of physical proof that her own childhood was real. The restraint is the respect. The show treats the moment as too important to manipulate. Here is what that toy actually represents, in the philosophy we have been assembling. Hambo is continuity. It is the one physical object that connects the immortal queen to the original child, across 1,000 years of revision and loss and self-rewriting. It is proof that the child existed, that there was a beginning, that there is a thread running back through all the overwritten selves to a single original self who was small and scared and loved. For a being whose identity is constantly fraying, whose memory she cannot fully trust. A single physical anchor to the verified past is not sentimental clutter. It is evidence. It is documentation. It is the closest thing Marceline has to proof that she is one continuous person, and not 1,000 strangers in sequence wearing the same face. When she lost it, she lost the thread, lost the proof. When Bubblegum returns it, Bubblegum is, in the deepest possible sense, returning Marceline to herself, handing her back the evidence of her own continuity. That is why the moment lands the way it lands. It is not about a toy, it is about whether there is a self there at all to come home to. And the toy is the answer, the physical, holdable, undeniable answer. Yes, there is. Here it is. And notice what the show is doing with the relationship between Marceline and Bubblegum in this episode, because it is doing something very specific and very important to the larger argument. Bubblegum is, for nearly the entire run of the show, the other long-lived being in Marceline's life. Bubblegum's exact age is left, deliberately, carefully ambiguous, but she is old, far older than her youthful appearance suggests, a being who has also watched generations of her own people live and die and be replaced, who has also had to govern across spans of time that would crush a mortal mind. The two of them are, in a profound sense, the only two characters in the series who genuinely understand the problem of duration from the inside. Everyone else is mortal, ephemeral, gone in a blink. Finn will age and die. Jake will age and die. The Candy People, the inhabitants of Ur, all of them are temporary from the vantage point of the two who stay. Marceline and Bubblegum are the two who stay. And so the relationship between them is not merely a romance the show slowly and carefully confirms over many years. It is, structurally, the single relationship Marceline has that is not automatically doomed by her immortality, because the other person in it is not going to die on the normal mortal schedule. Bubblegum is the one being Marceline can love without the cold math instantly resolving to future grief. Everyone else she loves. She loves while watching a clock she cannot stop. Bubblegum, she can love without the clock, or at least without the same clock. That is why the relationship matters as much as it does, why the show invests so much in it, why its eventual confirmation feels like such a release. And it is also why their falling out, the bitterness that led to Hambo being traded away, cuts so much deeper than an ordinary breakup. It is not just the loss of a partner, it is the loss of the only attachment in her entire existence that was supposed to be exempt from the curse, the one love that did not come with a built-in ending. To lose that is to lose the exception, to be thrown back into a world where every love she has is once again a love she will outlive. No wonder it broke something in her. No wonder getting it back and getting the toy back in the same gesture undoes her completely. The show finally fills in the long history between them in Bonnibel Bubblegum, Season 10, Episode 4, late in the run, when it has earned the right to look directly at what these two have been to each other across so much time. The episode reaches back into Bubblegum's origins and into the shared past. The two of them carry the long span during which they knew each other, drifted, fought, heard each other, and stayed somehow in each other's orbit despite everything. And what the episode quietly establishes is that the bond between Marceline and Bubblegum is not the bright, simple thing of a young romance. It is the weathered, complicated, scarred thing of two very old beings who have known each other long enough to have accumulated real grievances and real history, who have been to each other both the source of deep wounds and the only available witness to a length of life no mortal could comprehend. That is what makes it the right love for Marceline. And the episode understands this. A simple love, an easy love, would not be equal to who she is. She is too old, too layered, too scarred for an uncomplicated affection. What she needs, what the math of her existence requires, is not someone who loves an idealized version of her, but someone who has seen the real accumulated mess of 1,000 years and stayed. Bubblegum has seen her at her worst, has been wounded by her, and has wounded her in return, has watched her across centuries, and is still there. The love survives not because it is pure, but because it is durable, because it has been tested against time, the way Marceline herself has been tested against time, and has done the same work of continuous rechoosing. Two beings who each understand that the self is a practice, choosing across centuries to keep practicing alongside each other. That is the only kind of love that could possibly hold for someone who lives as long as she does. Not a love that is given once and assumed permanent, but a love that is, like the self, remade daily, chosen again every morning across an unimaginable span of mornings. And this is why the relationship is the natural culmination of the whole philosophy rather than a separate plot running beside it. Everything we have said about how Marceline maintains the self applies equally to how she maintains this love. The self is not a possession, but a practice, remade continuously. The love is not a possession, but a practice, remade continuously. The same daily choosing that keeps her a person across 1,000 years is the choosing that keeps her bond with Bubblegum alive across the same span. She does not stay herself by staying the same, and she does not stay in love by staying the same. Both are verbs. Both are work. Both are chosen again and again against the erosion that would otherwise dissolve them. The romance is not a reward bolted onto the philosophy. It is the philosophy applied to another person, proven to work twice. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is another thread to pull, and it goes back to something even older than the war, older than the ruins, older than Simon. It goes back to what she is made of. It Came from the Nightosphere is Season 2, Episode 1. It aired in 2010. It is the episode that introduces Marceline's father, Hunsan Abadir, the Lord of the Nightosphere, a demon who rules a realm of souls, a being of pure consuming appetite. And it sets up the other half of the question that defines her, which is not the question of memory, but the question of inheritance. Because Marceline is not only a person who has lived 1,000 years, she is also a person who was born of a monster, and who was later made into a monster a second time by the vampirism, and who has spent her entire existence deciding, over and over and over, whether being a monster is, in the end, what she is. The episode is played largely for comedy, and the comedy is good. Hunsan is a soul-sucking demon lord with terrifying power, but he is also, simultaneously, a neglectful and oblivious father who eats his daughter's fries and genuinely does not understand why she is upset about it. And the centerpiece of the episode is a musical number in which Marceline essentially screams at her father, in song, that he ate her fries and never once listened to her. The fries are a joke. The fries are also not a joke at all. The fries are a precise, perfect stand-in for every small act of attention and care a parent is supposed to perform. And Hudson never did. He is a being of pure appetite. He consumes. He takes. He does not see his daughter as a person with an interior life and her own small, precious things. He sees her as an extension of himself. And the things she values, even something as trivial as a paper bag of fries, he will consume without a second thought, without noticing. Because consuming without noticing is the entire content of what he is. The relationship deepens in Return to the Nightosphere, Season 4, Episode 5, which sends Finn and Jake into Hudson's realm and forces a more sustained look at the kind of being Marceline's father is, and the kind of place she comes from. The Nightosphere is a realm of torment and consumption, presided over by a father whose nature is to absorb the souls of others into himself. This is the bloodline. This is the inheritance. This is a family business, so to speak. And the family business is the consumption of other beings. And the show, by giving Marceline this father and this origin, is setting up a problem that will run quietly underneath every one of her appearances. She comes from a being whose nature is to consume others. She has, in her blood, the capacity to be exactly that. The question is whether the capacity is a destiny. And the song itself, the one where she accuses him of eating her fries, is worth slowing down for, because of how the show stages it. It is loud, it is angry, it is on the surface, a comedic musical number about a missing bag of fries, and the audience laughs, and it is genuinely funny. But listen to what she is actually saying underneath the comedy. She is cataloguing a lifetime of neglect through the smallest possible example, because the small example is safe to be angry about in a way the large one is not. She cannot say, "You were never a father to me. You never saw me as a person. You left me alone in a dead world." That is too big, too raw, too true. So she says, "You ate my fries, and you never listened." And the fries carry the whole unspeakable weight of the larger grievance, the way small complaints always carry larger ones in families that cannot speak the larger ones directly. The show lets the joke and the wound occupy the same notes at the same time, and that doubling, the comedy and the genuine ancient hurt, sharing one song, is exactly the kind of thing the series does with her constantly. Nothing about Marceline is ever only one thing. The funny song is also the saddest thing in the episode. And then there is Daddy's Little Monster, Season 4, Episode 6, which makes the inheritance question almost frighteningly literal. In this episode, Marceline ends up wearing her father's amulet, the source and symbol of his Nightosphere power, and she is transformed by it, becoming, briefly, a monstrous ruler, taking on his form and his consuming nature, ascending to his role. The episode is about Finn trying to get the amulet off her, about the seductive pull of becoming the thing her father is, about how naturally and how easily the power of the monster settles onto a being who was born of a monster and made into one a second time. And the philosophical content is right there on the surface, more visible than the show usually permits it to be. Marceline carries, in her literal bloodline and in her literal undead body, the capacity to become a monster of the deepest kind. Her father is one. The amulet offers her his power, his throne, his nature, his realm. And the question the episode forces, the question it dramatizes by physically putting the amulet on her and showing the transformation take hold, is whether she is, underneath everything, the same kind of being as him, whether monstrousness is something she inherited and cannot escape, or something she has to keep actively, daily, refusing. Watch how the transformation is framed, because the framing is the argument. The amulet does not force itself on her against her will from the outside, the way a curse would. She takes it on, in part, out of love, out of a tangled desire to protect, or to please, or to handle her father's mess for him. The way children of difficult parents so often try to absorb the parents' chaos to keep the peace. The monstrousness comes to her wrapped in something that looks like duty, like family, like care. And that is the real seduction the episode is interested in. The pull toward becoming the monster is not, for Marceline, a pull toward evil for its own sake. It is a pull toward becoming what her family is, toward fitting the role she was born into, toward stopping the exhausting work of being different from her own bloodline. It would be easier, in a sense, to just be what she comes from. The amulet offers rest from the resistance, and Finn, the small mortal, has to remind her, has to fight to get the thing off her, has to refuse on her behalf the surrender she is briefly tempted toward. The episode externalizes the daily internal war and lets a friend help her win it for once, visibly, where usually she wins it alone and unseen. This is the third pillar, and it connects most directly to the deepest version of who Marceline is and what she has chosen to be. She has every reason in existence to become a monster. Her father is one, and offers her the role. Her undead vampiric nature is monstrous by definition, requiring her to feed, carrying a predatory drive. She has lived long enough, lost enough, been hurt and abandoned and forgotten enough. That bitterness and cruelty would be entirely understandable, even expected, even reasonable. 1,000 years of accumulated grief could very plausibly produce a creature who has simply given up on the exhausting business of caring, who consumes the way her father consumes, who has concluded that since everything ends and everyone dies and all love becomes grief, she might as well stop pretending to be good and become the thing her blood and her body and her history all point toward. And she does not. Across the entire run of the series, with every possible reason and justification to become the monster, Marceline keeps choosing not to be one. She helps. She protects. She loves. Sideways and prickly and real. She writes songs that are really confessions of need. She holds onto the painful memories instead of taking Simon's painless oblivion. She contains the predator. The monstrousness is right there, available, inherited, blood deep, and historically justified. And she refuses it, not once in a dramatic climactic moment, but continuously. As an unremarkable daily practice, the same way she chooses to remain a continuous self in stakes, the same way she keeps loving the doomed in What Was Missing. Think about what that actually means, laid out plainly. It means that for Marceline, being good is not a personality trait she was lucky enough to be born with. It is a 1,000-year act of resistance against everything that is pulling her, constantly, toward becoming something terrible. The mortal characters in the show get to be good relatively easily, and there is no shame in that. But it is easier for them, because they have not been worn down by 10 centuries, because they have not buried everyone they have ever loved, because they do not have a literal demon for a father standing in another realm, offering them a throne and a nature to match. Marceline's goodness is more hard-won than anyone else's in the entire series, because she has more reasons than anyone else to abandon it, and more time in which to have abandoned it, and a clearer path toward abandoning it than any other character possesses. And the show, characteristically, never frames this as heroic. It never gives her a speech about choosing kindness over cruelty. It never lets her articulate the daily war she is fighting. It just shows her, episode after episode, century of backstory after century of backstory, quietly refusing the easy descent into the monster she has every right and reason and invitation to become. That refusal is, when you finally add it all up, the most heroic thing in the entire series, and it is almost entirely invisible, because the show trusts you to do the math yourself, and never does it for you. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. The show is also deeply interested in the unreliability of memory itself when it comes to Marceline, and this complicates the philosophy in a way that makes it richer rather than weaker. Memory of a Memory is Season 3, Episode 3. It aired in 2011. It involved literally entering Marceline's memories, traveling through them as though they were rooms in a building, and discovering in the process that even within her own mind, the past is not a fixed and reliable record. The memories are layered, they are edited, they are defended by the mind that holds them. There is a memory hidden inside another memory, a deeper room behind a false wall. The further you go into her past, the more you find that the history Marceline carries is not a clean archive, but a constructed thing, shaped and reshaped over and over by the needs and the wounds of the person doing the remembering. The structure of the episode is itself the argument. To get to the bottom of Marceline's memory, the explorers have to pass through layer after layer, and each layer is defended, guarded, walled off from the one beneath it. The deepest, most painful memories are buried under shallower ones, protected by the mind that cannot bear to look at them directly. This is how the episode visualizes the interior of a being who has lived too long and lost too much. Her memory is not a flat archive you can search. It is an excavation site, with the most recent and least painful material near the surface, and the oldest and most devastating material buried deep, behind defenses she built herself, without quite knowing she was building them. And the deeper you go, the more you understand that some of these defenses are load-bearing, that pulling them down carelessly, could collapse the whole structure, could undo the careful arrangement that lets her function at all. And this is the wrinkle that makes the whole question of the self harder and more honest. We have been saying that Marceline's self is the sum of what she refuses to forget, that her continuity depends on her holding the thread of memory against the erosion of time. But if memory itself is unreliable, if the past gets edited and defended and rebuilt a little every single time it is recalled, then even the thread she is gripping so hard is not solid. The Marceline who remembers Simon is not remembering Simon exactly as he was. She is remembering a version of him, a Simon shaped by 1,000 years of grief and longing and revision, polished and worn down and added to by 10 centuries of recollection. The continuous self she is fighting so hard to preserve is, in part, a story she tells herself, a narrative she maintains and curates because the alternative, the admission that there is no solid continuous self at all, only a series of present moments connected by an increasingly fictional past, is unbearable. But here is the turn, the thing that keeps this from being merely bleak. If the self is partly a story, then the telling of a story is itself an act, a doing, a practice. And we have been arriving, the whole essay, at the idea that the doing is exactly what the self is. So the unreliability of memory does not actually undermine the philosophy, it completes it. Marceline does not have a fixed past, sitting in storage, that she merely retrieves. She has a past she actively reconstructs, every time she remembers, shaping it, defending it, keeping it alive through the continuous work of recollection. The story is not a degraded copy of a lost original. The story is the living thing, maintained by the storyteller, and the maintaining is the continuity. A self held together by an actively maintained, partly invented narrative is not a fake self. It is the only kind of self anyone has ever had. Marceline just has more of it to maintain, and has been maintaining it longer, and so the work that is invisible in a mortal becomes in her the whole visible substance of who she is. This is not a flaw in the writing or a contradiction in the character. This is the show being unusually honest about something that is true for everyone, and simply more visible in someone who has lived 1,000 years. All memory works this way, for every person who has ever lived. You do not possess a recording of your own childhood. You possess a story about it, and the story is revised slightly every single time you tell it, edited by who you have become since, coloured by what you have learned to need from the past. The difference with Marceline is purely one of scale. A normal person revises a few decades of memory, and the revisions stay small enough that the story remains roughly faithful to what happened. Marceline has been revising 1,000 years of memory, recalling and re-recalling and re-editing across 10 centuries. By now, the distance between what actually happened and the story she carries must be vast, an entire constructed history, a self assembled out of fragments and inferences, and necessary fictions, held together by sheer will. And yet she keeps maintaining it, because that story, fictional or not in its details, is the only thing standing between her and the silent state, the painless dissolution, the becoming a stranger to yourself that she watched happen, in real time, to the man who saved her. The story might be partly false. Maintaining it is still the work that keeps her a person. A maintained fiction of continuity is, it turns out, a real continuity, because the maintaining is the self. Even the smaller, sillier episodes carry this weight once you know what to look for. Marceline's Closet, Season 3, Episode 21, is mostly a comedy about Finn and Jake getting trapped inside Marceline's house and going through her belongings while she is away, and the mounting awkwardness when she returns to find them. It is a light episode, a breather, and it never once announces itself as meaningful. But scattered all through it are glimpses of how she actually lives, alone across her enormous span of years, the objects she keeps, the way her personal space is arranged and filled. And what you see, if you look past the comedy of the premise, is the home of someone who has accumulated the physical residue of a very long life and does not seem able to let any of it go. It is the clutter of immortality, the accumulated, undiscarded archive of a self that cannot fully trust its own memory, and so surrounds itself with objects, with anchors, with proofs. Each thing in that house is a small handbow, a tangible link to a past that might otherwise dissolve into uncertainty. The show does not slow down to make this point in Marceline's Closet. It does not need to. The world building around her is consistent even in the breather episodes, and that consistency is a large part of why the character holds together so completely across so many wildly different tonal registers. from broad comedy to devastating tragedy and back. Whether the show is making you laugh about Finn and Jake hiding in a closet from an annoyed vampire, or making you weep about a worn stuffed toy, the underlying truth of who Marceline is stays absolutely fixed. She is a being trying to hold a self together across an impossible span of time, using a memory she cannot fully trust, and a collection of objects she cannot bring herself to discard, refusing both the easy oblivion and the inherited monstrousness, loving people she is doomed to outlive, choosing all of it daily. That truth is present in the comedy and in the tragedy alike, equally, completely. The show just changes how loudly it chooses to say it from episode to episode. In the tragedies, it whispers it directly into your ear. In the comedies, it leaves it lying around the set for you to notice, like an object in a cluttered house. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Marceline's relationship to storytelling itself is part of the philosophy. And Bad Little Boy, Season 5, Episode 11, is the strange, sideways episode that reveals it. In Bad Little Boy, Marceline narrates a story, telling a tale of gender-swapped versions of the show's characters, spinning out an entire alternate world for her own amusement and for the listeners. On the surface, it is a fan service episode, a chance to play with the Fiona and Cake versions of the cast. Underneath, it is an episode about Marceline as an author, a maker of narratives, someone who constructs worlds and selves out of language for the pleasure and the control of it. And that is not incidental to who she is. A being who has had to construct and maintain her own continuous self out of unreliable memory, who has had to author the story of her own life across 1,000 years, is naturally going to be a teller of stories, a shaper of narratives. Someone for whom the line between the true past and the constructed past is thin and familiar and not very frightening. Because here is the connection, and it is subtle. Marceline is comfortable making things up. She is comfortable inventing characters, spinning narratives, building alternate versions of reality, precisely because she has spent her whole existence doing a quiet version of exactly that, with her own past, maintaining the story of who she is, against the erosion of time. The episode lets her do openly and playfully what she does, secretly and seriously every day. She authors, she constructs, she decides what the story is. And there is a kind of power in that, the power of the immortal who has outlived all the witnesses, and so becomes the sole author of her own history. With no one left to remember the little girl, Marceline is the only one who gets to say who the little girl was. That is a terrible loneliness, the loneliness of the asymmetric witness. But it is also, quietly, a kind of authority. She is the author of herself now, because everyone who could contradict her is gone. The storytelling in Bad Little Boy is the visible, joyful tip of a very deep and very lonely iceberg. And this leads to the single most consistent fact about how Marceline relates to the world, the thing that runs through every era of her and every register of the show. She makes music. Across the entire series, whenever Marceline has something true that she cannot say in ordinary speech, she sings it. The accusation that is really a confession, in what was missing, comes out as a song. The grief over Simon in I Remember You comes out as a song. The rage at her neglectful father in It Came from the Ninosphere comes out as a song. Her mother's promise about change and continuity comes to her across 1,000 years as a song. When the show wants to show you the actual interior of this guarded, walled-off, performing character, it almost always reaches for music, because music is the one channel her defenses do not fully guard. Think about why that would be true for a being like her specifically. Ordinary speech is where the performance lives. In conversation, Marceline can be sarcastic, can deflect, can build the wall, can perform the cool invulnerability the fandom mistook for her personality. Speech is controllable. But music is a different kind of utterance. It carries what speech withholds. When she picks up the bass and sings, the true thing escapes around the edges of the performance, because a song is a structure that holds emotion the way a cup holds water, and the emotion she is carrying is too heavy to keep out of the cup. And there is something else, something that connects music directly to the philosophy of the self we have been building. Music is the one format that can be transmitted. Memory cannot be handed to another person. The 1,000 years she carries cannot be downloaded into someone who could share the weight of them. But a song can be sung to another person. A song can be learned, repeated, carried forward by someone else after the singer is gone. When Marceline sings, She is doing the one thing available to her that lets even a fragment of her interior cross the gap between her endless solitary existence and another living mind. And so her music is not a hobby and not a mere detail of character design. It is the technology she has developed across 1,000 years for the otherwise impossible task of being known. She cannot make anyone live long enough to truly know her across the full span of who she has been. But she can write the song, and the song can carry the shape of the feeling, and someone hearing it can feel for 3 minutes a little of what it is to be her. That is the closest she can ever get to ending the asymmetry, to being witnessed in return instead of only witnessing. Every song she writes is a message in a bottle thrown across the gap of duration, addressed to whoever happens to be listening, saying, "This is what it is like in here. This is what I carry. Please, for the length of this one song, know me." The bass guitar is not an accessory. It is a lifeline thrown toward the possibility of being seen. There is a darker test of all of this, and the show is brave enough to stage it directly. Red Starved is Season 5, Episode 38. It traps Marceline, Finn, and Jake in a cave, and it gradually deprives Marceline of the red she needs to consume, the color that sustains her vampiric nature. As she starves, she begins to lose control. She begins to become genuinely dangerous, to slide toward the predator, toward the monster that her nature contains. And the episode forces a confrontation with the part of her existence that is truly other, truly predatory, the part that the cool aesthetic and the sad love songs let the audience comfortably forget. Marceline is not only a tragic immortal who loves people against her own better judgment, she is also a creature who feeds, who has a nature that, left unfed, turns hungry and dangerous, and threatens the very people she would, fed, protect with her life. And what is most interesting is how the episode resolves the tension, and what the resolution says about her. Even starving, even sliding toward the predatory state, even with her literal biology screaming at her to feed, Marceline does not actually harm Finn or Jake. The control holds. It holds barely, at the trembling edge, but it holds. And this connects directly back to the refusal of monstrousness, but it adds a crucial detail to it. It is not merely that she chooses in calm and comfortable moments to be good. Anyone can be good when it is easy. It is that even in the extremity, even when starvation is dismantling her higher functions, even when every cell in her undead body is demanding that she become the monster and take what she needs from the small, warm creatures trapped in the cave with her, the refusal holds. The choice to not be her father, to not be the consuming thing, is not a fair weather choice she makes only when there is no cost. It is a choice that survives starvation. That is how deep into her it goes. That is how much of her 1,000 years has been spent building and reinforcing the internal structure that keeps the monster contained, until the containment holds even when her conscious self is being eaten away by hunger. The good is not a mood she is in. The good is load-bearing. And here we arrive at something very close to the center of the whole thing. The question we started with, all the way back in the ruins with the child and the stuffed toy, was whether there is a continuous self at all underneath 1,000 years of rewriting, or whether immortality simply produces a sequence of strangers wearing the same face in turn. And the show's answer, accumulated patiently across all these episodes, is subtle, and it is worth stating with great care, because it is easy to get wrong. There is no continuous self in the sense of a fixed, unchanging essence sitting at the core, the same forever. Marceline is not the same person she was 1,000 years ago, or 100, or even at the start of the series compared to its end. The Mother's Lullaby, everything stays, was wrong, at least at this scale. Things do not stay the same as they change. Not over 1,000 years. The tree becomes a different tree. But, and this is everything, there is something continuous, and it is not a thing she possesses. It is a thing she does. The continuity is the refusing, the choosing, the daily, repeated, never finished act of holding the memories despite the pain, declining the painless oblivion, resisting the inherited monstrousness, containing the predator, and loving the doomed anyway. That practice is the self, not a noun, a verb. Marceline is not a person who persists. Marceline is a persisting. The self is not what survives. The self is the surviving. This is a genuinely radical idea for a children's cartoon to be built around, and the show is so quiet about it, so unwilling to ever say it aloud, that most people watch the entire series and absorb the idea completely without ever consciously noticing they have absorbed it. Identity is not something you are, it is something you keep doing. The self is not a possession you were issued at birth and then carry around intact for the duration. The self is a practice you perform, moment to moment, choice to choice, and if you stop performing it, it dissolves exactly the way Simon dissolved, painlessly, gradually, into someone who feels fondness he cannot explain, and reads apologies he does not understand, and asks for help with songs from a sad vampire he does not recognize as the child he raised. Marceline is the show's argument that a self can survive any length of time at all, even 1,000 years, even 10,000, but only and exactly as long as the person keeps actively making it. The instant the making stops, the self is gone, no matter how long the body keeps walking around, floating, playing bass, going through the motions of a life that no longer has anyone home inside it. And the show makes this argument not by stating it, but by structuring its entire portrait of Marceline around it. Every episode we have walked through is a different face of the same single idea. Henchman is the performance of menace that keeps the wound from being touched. Stakes is the choosing to continue, and the patchwork self-assembled from everything she had to absorb to survive. I Remember You and Betty and Broke His Crown are the failure modes she watches and refuses. What was missing is the loving the doomed despite the math. Skywitch is the physical anchor that proves the thread, and Bonnie Bell Bubblegum is the proof that love, like the self, is a practice remade daily. The Nightosphere episodes are the inherited monstrousness she keeps declining. Memory of a Memory is the honest admission that the thread is partly fiction, and the recognition that maintaining the fiction is itself the continuity. The Vault is the reaching back to reclaim her own abandoned past selves before they become ghosts. Red Starved is the proof that the refusal survives even starvation. Bad Little Boy and all her music are the authorship of a self that no one else is left to author. Marcy and Hudson is the final contrast with the father who had the same eternity and did none of the work. They are not separate insights about a complicated character. They are one insight, shown from many angles. The way the show always works, building the thesis through accumulation until the weight of all the evidence makes the conclusion feel less like an argument and more like gravity. And there is a reason the show needed a 1,000-year-old vampire to make this particular argument, rather than any of its mortal characters. The truth that the self is a practice rather than a possession is true for everyone. But in a mortal life, it stays hidden, because the brevity does so much of the holding together that you never notice you are also doing it by hand. You get to believe, comfortably, that you simply are a continuous person, that yourself is a thing you have rather than a thing you do, because you will not live long enough for the illusion to break down. Marceline lives long enough for the illusion to break down completely. At her scale, there is no hiding the work. The self visibly frays, the memory visibly becomes unreliable. The past selves visibly separate into ghosts. The monstrousness visibly offers itself as an easier path. Everything that is gently obscured in a mortal life is starkly exposed in hers, and so she becomes the place the show can go to show you, without metaphor, what holding a self together actually requires once the brevity is removed and the work is laid bare. She is not a special case. She is the general case, made visible by being slowed down and stretched across 1,000 years. This is the deepest reason the character resonates the way she does, far beyond the cool aesthetic and the good songs. People feel, watching her, something they recognize without being able to name. And what they recognize is the work. Everyone is doing the work. The daily holding together, the choosing of who to be, the refusing of the easier and worse versions of themselves, the maintaining of a story about their own past, the loving of people they will lose. Everyone is doing it, and almost no one sees themselves doing it. Because in a normal life, it is invisible. She is what the universal human labor of being a continuous person looks like when it is turned up to its maximum, when the time scale is so vast that the labor can no longer hide. To watch her is to watch, externalized and dramatized, the thing you are quietly doing every day of your own much shorter life. That is why she lands. That is why a cool vampire with a bass guitar became for so many people the emotional center of a children's cartoon about a boy and his dog. She is a 1,000-year-long answer to the question every person is silently asking, can I stay myself? And her answer, earned across 10 centuries, is yes, but only if you never stop doing the work of it. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Return now to Simon and Marcy, Season 5, Episode 14, which aired March 25th, 2013, and which was Rebecca Sugar's final storyboard before she left the show to create Steven Universe. We started here, and we end here, because this single episode contains both halves of the entire philosophy folded into one image. You have the child Marceline, small and frightened and alive and mortal, the original self, the first draft, the one that all the later revisions are revisions of. And you have Simon, wearing the crown, singing the theme song from the old television show Cheers, to keep the child calm, slowly being erased by the very thing that grants him the power to protect her. Two beings, both being rewritten by forces far larger than themselves. One of them, Simon, is losing the fight, dissolving in real time into someone who will not remember any of this, who will not remember her, who will not remember himself. The other, Marceline, is standing at the very beginning of a 1,000-year fight she has not yet learned she is going to have to wage, every day, forever. And the thing the episode shows you, the thing that makes it the emotional and philosophical key to the entire character, is this. Simon keeps protecting her, even as he forgets why he is protecting her. There is a version of that scene where the forgetting is purely and only tragic, pure loss, a good man emptied out into nothing, and that version would be devastating in a simple way. But that is not the version the show chose to make. The show shows Simon, even as the memories drain away, even as he loses the ability to hold on to who Marceline is, or who he himself is, or why any of this matters, continuing to act in her interest. He keeps her warm. He keeps her safe. He keeps singing. The care outlasts the memory. The protecting continues after the knowing has already gone. And precisely this, is the seed of everything Marceline becomes. She learns from the man who saved her at the very beginning of her endless life. The single most important thing she will ever learn. She learns that the doing can survive even when the self that started the doing has dissolved. That you can keep choosing to protect, to love, to be good, even when you can no longer fully remember why you started. The practice can outlast the person. The verb can outlive the noun. Think about what Marceline actually carries out of that ruined grocery store beyond the trauma and beyond the small stuffed toy. She carries a working model of how to survive immortality, not by staying the same, which she will learn is impossible, not by holding a single fixed self intact across 1,000 years, which simply cannot be done by any being, but by continuing the practice even when the self frays and thins and revises, by being a persisting rather than a person. Simon, in his slow, heartbreaking dissolution, demonstrated the failure mode for her, the painless death, the becoming a stranger, the comfortable emptying out that she will spend 1,000 years refusing. But in those final, lucid, and then post-lucid acts of protection, Simon also demonstrated, without meaning to, the only alternative. Keep doing the good thing. Keep refusing the monster. Do it even when you cannot fully remember why, because the doing is the self, and as long as the doing continues, you have not actually died. No matter how much of you the years have taken, no matter how much the crown of time has erased. Simon failed at remembering, but he succeeded to his last lucid breath and passed it at doing. And the child watching learned the lesson that would keep her alive as a person for 1,000 years. Late in the series, the show returns one final time to the question of inheritance in Marcy and Hudson, Season 10, Episode 7. By this point, Marceline is in a far more stable place than she has ever been. More settled, more at peace, more herself, having done the long work. And her father returns, the Lord of the Nightosphere, the original monster, the source of the inherited darkness, the being of pure consuming appetite, who ate her fries and never listened. The episode is, in large part, a reckoning between them, a confrontation between the daughter who refused, daily for 1,000 years, to become the monster, and the father who is nothing but a monster and never refused anything in his endless life. And what is most striking about the episode is how completely the power has shifted between them. Marceline is no longer the frightened child of the ruins, or the defensive teenager performing detachment and cruelty to keep the world at arm's length. She has done the 1,000-year work. She has built the self by hand through the relentless daily practice of refusal. And she can face her father now not as a being in danger of becoming him, not as someone the amulet might still seduce, but as a being who has decisively, permanently, and through 10 centuries of accumulated choices, chosen otherwise. The contrast the episode draws between father and daughter is the entire argument compressed into a single relationship. Hudson has lived an immortal existence too. Hudson has had the same eternity available to him, the same unending span of years, the same opportunity. And Hudson has spent the whole of it being exactly what he always was. He did not change. He did not grow. He did not do the work of becoming someone. He stayed the consuming thing, the appetite without an interior, the monster who eats his daughter's fries, and never once notices that she is a person with her own small precious things, and her own enormous private grief. Hudson is what immortality looks like without the practice. He is the cautionary version, the control group, the proof of what Marceline would have become if she had simply stopped choosing. He persisted across the same 1,000 years she did, longer even, but he persisted as a static thing, a fixed noun, never once a verb, never a making, never a remaking. And the difference between them, father and daughter, both immortal, both monstrous by their given nature, is the entire difference between a self that is continuously performed and a self that is merely emptily endured. Marceline did the work. Hudson did not. That is the whole of it. That is why she is a person, and he is only a force. And there is a mercy in the lateness of this episode, in the show, waiting until season 10 to stage this reckoning. The Marceline who finally faces her father on equal footing is not the same being who screamed at him about fries in season 2. She has done 8 more years of the work, on screen and in the vast off-screen centuries the show keeps gesturing at. The confrontation lands the way it lands, precisely because we have watched her earn the steadiness she brings to it. Early Marceline, in It Came from the Nightosphere, could only meet her father with raw fury, the fury of a wound still open and undefended. Late Marceline, in Marcy and Hudson, can meet him with something closer to clarity, the clarity of someone who has decided, finally and permanently, that she is not him and never will be, that the bloodline is not a destiny, that the door he keeps holding open is a door she has chosen across 1,000 years to keep walking past. The fury has become resolve. That transformation from fury to resolve is itself the whole 1,000-year practice, visible in the difference between her first confrontation with her father and her last. Let that comparison sit, because it clarifies everything that came before it. Immortality is not in itself either a blessing or a curse in the world of this show. It is a condition, a length of time, a quantity neutral in itself. What it becomes depends entirely on what you choose to do inside it. Hudson takes the eternity and becomes a monster, or rather simply stays the monster he always was, frozen, unchanging, consuming, an appetite that learned nothing across 10 centuries. Marceline takes the very same eternity and becomes a person painfully, repeatedly, incompletely, through the daily refusal to dissolve and the daily refusal to consume and the daily insistence on loving things she will lose. Same condition, opposite outcomes. The only variable is the practice. And so the philosophy of Marceline arrives, finally, at its full statement. The self is something you make, not something you have. This is true for everyone, but it is hidden for mortals, because the brief span of a normal life does so much of the holding together for free that you never notice you are also doing it yourself. The truth only becomes visible, only becomes testable, only becomes heroic at the longest possible timescales, where there is nothing whatsoever holding you together except your own continued, exhausting, unwitnessed choosing. Marceline lives at that timescale, and so Marceline is where the show goes to show you the truth. All of it comes to rest in the finale. Come Along With Me is the 44-minute series finale of Adventure Time. It aired September 3rd, 2018. It is one episode, a single extended ending, despite some databases counting it as several entries for runtime purposes. And Come Along With Me is its official title, not the promotional name, Cartoon Network attached to it. In it, among everything else the finale has to resolve across 8 years and 280-some episodes of accumulated story, Marceline and Princess Bubblegum kiss, making fully explicit and undeniable what the show had spent so many years carefully, patiently building. And this moment, which the audience rightly celebrated, is far more than a romance finally paying off. It is the resolution of Marceline's entire philosophical arc, the single place where all 3 of the pillars we have traced come together and lock into place. Think about what that kiss actually means inside the framework we have built across this whole essay. Marceline has spent the series learning, and the show has spent the series demonstrating. That connection is worth the grief every time, even when grief is the only guaranteed outcome of the connection. That is the second pillar, the loving of the doomed. But Bubblegum, the other long-lived being, the only other one who truly understands duration from the inside, is the single connection in Marceline's entire existence that is not guaranteed to end in the normal mortal way. The one love that is not automatically doomed by the cold math of immortality. So when Marceline finally, fully, openly chooses Bubblegum, in front of everyone, she is not merely getting the girl. She is making the most considered, most informed bet of her 1,000-year life. She is choosing to love the one person who might actually last, who might actually stay after 1,000 years of bravely loving people who could not stay, who were gone before she had finished loving them. It is the reward for all the refusals and all the losses. After centuries of loving the doomed because she could not stop herself from loving, even though it always ended in grief, she finally arrives at someone who is not doomed in the same way. Someone the math does not automatically claim. The grief is not guaranteed this time, and she has earned that the whole long way through the entire unwitnessed practice of choosing connection over self-protection, even when self-protection was the rational choice. And the finale also gives us the song Time Adventure, which Rebecca Sugar returned to the show specifically to write, years after she had already left, to make Steven Universe. The song's central repeated promise is that time is, in a sense, an illusion, that the moments you have spent with the people you love are never truly lost, that they happened, and that the happening of them is permanent, untouchable, beyond the reach of any ending. For most of the characters in the finale, this is a comfort, a sweet reassurance offered at the close of a long story. For Marceline, it is something far larger. It is the correction of the lullaby. Her mother sang, "In everything stays, that things stay the same as they change." And Marceline's entire 1,000-year existence seemed designed to disprove it, to show that at this scale, nothing stays the same. That the tree becomes a different tree, and the self becomes a different self, and the original is lost. Time Adventure offers the repaired version of the promise, the version that survives 1,000 years. Things do not stay the same. That much was always true, and the lullaby was wrong about it. But things stay. The moments happened. The child in the ruins was real. Simon's protection was real. Every cold night of it, every doomed love across 10 centuries was real while it lasted. And the realness of it does not get erased by the ending of it. The thread Marceline has spent 1,000 years fighting to hold is not, after all, only a fiction. The past is not retrievable, but it is also not nothing. It happened. It stays. And for a being who has spent 10 centuries privately terrified that her own continuity is an illusion, that there is no real thread, that she is only a series of strangers, that promise, sung by BMO to a guitar at the end of everything, is the closest thing to peace the show is able to give her, and it gives it freely. And there is one more layer to what Time Adventure does for her specifically, beyond correcting the lullaby. The song is sung by BMO, a small robot, to a guitar in the middle of a war as a way of stopping the chaos. It is offered to everyone, freely, without condition. And in being offered to everyone, it ends, for one moment, the asymmetry that has defined Marceline's entire existence. For her whole life she has been the one who remembers, alone, the one carrying the past that no one else can corroborate, the sole witness to 1,000 years. Time Adventure proposes a world in which the moments are permanent, in which the past is not held alone by one exhausted witness, but is simply, structurally real, woven into the fabric of time itself, where it cannot be lost and does not need anyone to guard it. If the moments stay on their own, then Marceline does not have to be the only one holding them up. The weight she has carried alone becomes, for the length of the song, a weight the universe itself agrees to share. That is a kind of relief she has never been offered before, not the relief of forgetting, which she always refused, but the relief of being told that her refusing was not in vain, that the things she fought to remember were worth remembering, because they were, all along, real and permanent and safe. Watch where the finale leaves her, in its final images, after the war is over and the chaos is stilled. She is with Bubblegum. She is at peace, or as close to peace as a 1,000-year-old being can come. She has done the work, all of it, the refusing and the choosing and the loving and the remembering. across an existence longer than civilizations, and she has arrived at the end of the show not as a tragic figure crushed by her own duration, but as a person who survived it, intact, herself, still capable of love, and still capable of music, and still, after everything, choosing to stay. The show does not give her a grand speech to mark the achievement. It just lets her be there, at the end, alive, and herself and loved. Which is, when you understand what it cost, the most triumphant ending the show could possibly give her. She made it. 1,000 years, and she made it, and she is still a person, and she is not alone. So consider what Adventure Time has actually done with this character. Quietly, across 8 years and 10 seasons and 100 small moments that most people walked right past on the way to the jokes and the adventures. It took a cool vampire girl with a bass guitar and a sad backstory, the kind of character a lesser show would have left as exactly that. And it used her, gently, persistently, never once breaking the surface to announce what it was doing, to ask one of the oldest and largest questions there is: what is a self, and can a self survive time? And it answered, without ever stopping the story to lecture or to summarize, that a self is not a thing you have, but a thing you do. That it does not survive time by staying the same, but by being continuously and effortfully remade. That the work of remaking it is hardest and most necessary and most invisible at the longest scales. And that the only forces strong enough to help you do that brutal work are memory, however unreliable and partly invented, and connection, however doomed and grief-bound. Marceline is the proof of concept. 1,000 years and she is still a person, not because she possesses some unchanging essence, but because she never once stopped, for a single day in 10 centuries, the work of making herself one. And it is worth saying plainly before the final image what the show is offering the listener through all of this, because it is offering something. Most people will never live 1,000 years, but everyone will, at some point, feel the thing Marceline feels at a smaller scale. Everyone will lose people and have to keep going as someone slightly different afterward. Everyone will look back at an earlier version of themselves and feel the strange distance, the sense that the person in the old memory is and is not them. Everyone will be tempted in grief or exhaustion by some smaller version of the painless oblivion, the wish to simply forget what hurts. And the show, through Marceline, offers a model for what to do with all of that. Keep the memories even when they hurt, because the hurt is proof the people were real. Keep loving even though loss is coming, because a love that ends is better than a self that never risks one. Keep refusing the worst version of yourself that grief makes available. Keep reaching back to gather up the selves you used to be. Do the work, the daily quiet work, of remaining a person. The show does not promise it is easy. It promises, through a 1,000-year-old vampire who managed it, that it is possible. That is not a small thing for a children's cartoon to be about. It is one of the largest things that anything can be about. The question of what holds a person together against time. The question every human being is actually asking under all the smaller questions. And the show carried it so lightly, hid it so completely inside the songs and the jokes and the monster fights and the comedy episodes about hiding in closets, that you could watch the entire series, beginning to end, absorb the whole philosophy into your bones, and never once feel that you had been lectured to. Never once catch the show in the act of teaching you anything. You just came away understanding, somewhere underneath the level of words, that the people who last are not the ones who manage to stay the same, but the ones who keep choosing, every single day, who they are going to be, against everything that would dissolve them. Marceline floats instead of walking. She dresses in red and black. She plays bass and writes songs that are really confessions. And underneath all of it for 1,000 years, in a silence no one else could see, she has been doing the quietest and the hardest work there is. The work of remaining a person when every single thing about her existence is designed, by nature and by time and by blood, to dissolve her into something less. That is the philosophy of Marceline. The self is a practice, and she has been practicing longer than anyone. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.